3 years ago, on a snow-covered Christmas Eve in Chicago, Korean Mafia boss Yoon Seok-jae walked into Rising Star Cafe seeking solitude and found salvation instead. A 7-year-old girl named Nia Moore offered him something he'd never known: unconditional acceptance. Her mother, Talia, gave him something equally precious: trust, despite knowing the darkness of his world. They built a family from fractured pieces, carefully, slowly, with love as their foundation. Now, 3 years later, that foundation faces its greatest test. Nia is 10, wise beyond her years, but still innocent enough to believe in happy endings. Talia and Seok-jae have built a life together, their bond strengthened by shared struggles and quiet devotion. And inside, Talia grows a secret, a daughter neither of them planned but both already love. But the past doesn't stay buried, and when a determined detective uncovers a truth that connects Seok-jae's violent history to Talia's greatest loss, their carefully constructed world threatens to collapse under the weight of impossible questions. Can love survive the revelation that his empire created her widow's grief? October brought crisp air and changing leaves to Chicago's Gold Coast, where Seok-jae's penthouse overlooked the city he'd once ruled with calculated ruthlessness. 3 years of loving Talia and Nia had softened his edges without dulling his instincts. He still commanded his organization, but differently now, with boundaries his father would have considered weakness and mercy that his lieutenants initially questioned until they saw the results. Talia stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, one hand resting unconsciously on her still flat stomach. 6 weeks pregnant, confirmed yesterday, told to no one yet. Not even Seok-jae, though she'd planned to tell him tonight over the dinner he'd arranged, just the two of them, Nia sleeping over at her best friend's house. "Mama," Nia's voice carried from her bedroom, where she was supposedly finishing homework. "Can I show you something?" Talia found her daughter sprawled across the bed, surrounded by drawings. At 10, Nia had inherited her late father's artistic talent and her mother's fierce determination. The pictures showed families, always families, parents with children, siblings holding hands, homes filled with light. "This one's my favorite," Nia said, holding up a drawing of 4 figures. 2 adults, 2 children. "That's you and Seok-jae, and that's me, and that's—" She pointed to the smallest figure, a child with ribbons in her hair. "That's my baby sister." Talia's breath caught. "Baby sister? I've been asking for one for forever." Nia's excitement was genuine, uncomplicated by the reality that babies didn't arrive on demand. "Do you think God listens when you pray for the same thing every night? Or does he get tired of hearing it?" "God never gets tired of listening to you, baby." Talia settled beside her daughter, emotion thick in her throat. "But sometimes his timing is different than ours." "I know. But I have this feeling." Nia pressed a hand to her chest with endearing seriousness. "Like something good is coming. Something that will make our family complete." Before Talia could respond, her phone buzzed. Seok-jae texting from his office downtown. "Dinner reservation confirmed. 8 p.m. Wear the blue dress I bought you. I have something important to discuss." A second text followed. "I love you, both of you." He always included Nia, never "I love you" singular, always plural, acknowledging that loving Talia meant loving her daughter with equal devotion. Talia smiled, typing back, "I have something important to discuss too. See you tonight." She didn't notice the shadow that had been following her for the past week, didn't see the man in the unmarked car across the street, camera trained on the penthouse windows, documenting every movement with methodical precision. Detective Marcus Wright had been investigating Yoon Seok-jae for 18 months, convinced that beneath the legitimate business acquisitions and charitable donations, the Korean Mafia boss still operated in darkness. What Marcus had discovered 3 days ago changed everything. He pulled up the file on his laptop, information that had cost him favors and sleepless nights to obtain. The workplace accident that killed Talia's husband, Derek Moore, 3.5 years ago. The official report citing equipment failure at the construction site. The closed investigation that no one questioned, because Derek was just another working-class black man whose death didn't warrant deeper scrutiny. Except Marcus had questioned it, had followed threads that others ignored, interviewed workers who'd been told to keep quiet, examined financial records that revealed payments made to the construction company's foreman, payments that originated from a shell corporation tied to the Volkov family. The same Volkov family that Seok Jae had systematically destroyed in a territorial war that began 4 years ago. Marcus cross-referenced dates, locations, motives. The picture that emerged made his stomach turn. Derek Moore had been working a job site in territory the Volkovs considered theirs. When Seok Jae's organization moved in, the Volkovs retaliated, not against Seok Jae directly, but against civilians in contested zones. Insurance claims, property damage, and in Derek's case, a sabotaged construction crane that dropped steel beams like judgment from heaven. Seok Jae hadn't ordered Derek's death. Probably didn't even know the man existed. But his war had created the conditions. His territorial expansion had painted targets on innocent backs, and Talia Moore had become a widow because of moves he'd made on a chessboard where human lives were pawns. Marcus watched Talia laugh at something her daughter said, watched her place a protective hand over her stomach, in a gesture he recognized from when his own wife had been pregnant. He should feel triumph. This was the leverage he needed. Expose the connection, force Talia to cooperate, use her testimony to finally bring down the organization that had corrupted Chicago's underworld for 2 generations. But Marcus saw a family. Saw a woman who'd survived devastating loss and found happiness again. Saw a child who looked at Seok Jae with the particular adoration daughters reserved for fathers who chose them. Saw a man who, for whatever reason, had apparently become something other than the monster his reputation suggested. Destroying them would be justice for Derek Moore. It would also be cruelty to the family he'd left behind. Marcus closed his laptop, decision unmade, conscience at war with duty. He had 48 hours before he needed to present his findings to his captain. 48 hours to decide whether truth served justice or simply created new victims. Across town in his downtown office, Seok Jae reviewed quarterly reports with Jin, his most trusted lieutenant. The numbers were good, better than good. Legitimate business ventures thriving, illegal operations scaled back to the point where they existed more as legacy obligations than active enterprises. "Boss," Jin said carefully, "there's something you should know." Seok Jae looked up from the spreadsheet. Jin's tone carried warning. "Tell me." "Detective Marcus Wright. He's been watching the penthouse, following Talia when she goes to work. I had our people run background. He's clean, dedicated, lost his sister to gang violence 5 years ago. He's not looking for payoffs. He wants to bring you down." "Has he approached Talia?" "Not yet, but he's building a case. I don't know what he has, but he's confident enough to commit resources." Seok Jae's jaw tightened. He'd known this day would come, had prepared for it, set contingencies in place, ensured that if he went down, his organization could survive without him, and Talia and Nia would be protected. What he hadn't prepared for was the particular fear that came from having something precious to lose. "Increase security around them," he ordered. "Passive surveillance only. I don't want Talia frightened. And Jin, find out exactly what Wright knows." "Already working on it, boss." After Jin left, Seok Jae stood at his office window, staring out at the city he'd fought to control. He'd made peace with his past, accepted that he'd done terrible things for power and survival. But he'd changed, became the man Talia believed he could be, the father figure Nia deserved. If Wright's investigation threatened that, if exposure meant losing his family, Seok Jae would do whatever necessary to protect them, even if it meant confronting truths he'd spent 3 years trying to bury. The restaurant Seok Jae chose was intimate. Low lighting, private booths, the kind of place where conversations stayed between the people having them. Talia arrived wearing the blue dress he'd requested, her natural hair styled in elegant twists, looking like she belonged in this world of quiet luxury, even though 3 years ago She'd been taking buses in snowstorms. Seok Jae stood when she approached, his white dress shirt open at the collar revealing the dragon tattoo that had become as familiar to her as her own skin. The 4 buttons undone weren't about seduction anymore. They were about comfort, about being able to breathe around the woman who'd taught him that vulnerability wasn't weakness. "You're beautiful," he said, pulling out her chair with the particular care he showed in all things concerning her. "You're biased." But Talia smiled, accepting the compliment and the kiss he pressed to her temple before taking his own seat. They ordered wine. She declined hers, claiming a headache, and Seok Jae accepted the explanation without question. They talked about Nia's upcoming school project, about the cafe expansion Talia was managing. She'd bought Rising Star with Seok Jae's investment, turning it into a thriving business. About everything except the important thing they both needed to say. Finally, over dessert neither of them touched, Seok Jae reached across the table and took her hand. "I need to tell you something." Talia's pulse quickened. "I need to tell you something too." "Ladies first," he said with a small smile. She took a breath, gathering courage. "I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air between them. Seok Jae's expression went through several shifts, surprise, joy, fear, wonder, before settling into something Talia couldn't quite name. "How long?" His voice was rough with emotion. 6 weeks. I found out yesterday. I know we didn't plan this and Nia's 10 now and it's complicated, but... Talia. He squeezed her hand, stopping the nervous ramble. "I'm terrified and thrilled in equal measure. A daughter. How do you know it's a girl?" "Because you deserve to be surrounded by strong women who love you fiercely." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "And because Nia's been praying for a sister." Talia laughed, the sound breaking tension. "She told you?" "She tells me everything. Did you know she's decided to become an astronaut artist? She plans to paint the Earth from space." His expression softened with the particular tenderness he reserved for Nia. "She's extraordinary, like her mother." "And her father," Talia said quietly, referring to Derek as she sometimes did, acknowledging the man who'd given her Nia without diminishing what Seok Jae had become to them. The mention shifted something in Seok Jae's demeanor. His hand tightened on hers, and she saw shadows gather in his eyes, the same shadows that had been there that first Christmas Eve, before Nia had offered to share her mother with a sad stranger. "What did you need to tell me?" Talia asked, instinct warning her that whatever he was about to say would change things. Seok Jae pulled out his phone, showing her a series of photographs. The same man in various locations, outside the penthouse, near the cafe, in a car across from Nia's school. "His name is Detective Marcus Wright. He's been investigating me for over a year. My people confirmed he's building a case." Seok Jae's voice held the particular flatness he used when discussing business, his protection against feeling too much. "I don't know what he has, but he's watching you and Nia. I needed you to know." Talia stared at the photos, ice forming in her chest. "Why would he watch us?" "Because you're my weakness. Because he knows that threatening you is the fastest way to get to me." Seok Jae met her gaze steadily. "I've arranged additional security. You won't see them, but they're there. And if Wright approaches you, I need you to tell me immediately." "Seok Jae." Talia struggled with competing instincts, the need to protect her daughter, the love she felt for this man, the fear that his world would eventually consume them all. "Is he right? About you?" "About what I was, yes." No hesitation, no deflection. "About what I am now?" "I'd like to think I've changed, but the past doesn't disappear just because we want it to." They drove home in silence, both processing revelations that had transformed a romantic dinner into something heavier. Talia rested her hand on her stomach, thinking about the life growing inside her. Another daughter who would be born into this complicated world, this family built from love and shadows in equal measure. Seok Jae walked her to the penthouse door, his hand at the small of her back, protective, possessive, gentle all at once. "I won't let anything happen to you," to any of you. I know. And she did. Trusted him with a certainty that should have frightened her but instead brought comfort. Inside, Nia was already asleep, having returned from her sleepover early. Talia checked on her, adjusting blankets and pressing a kiss to her forehead. Her daughter's face held the particular peace of someone who didn't yet understand that happiness required constant protection. Seok-jae stood in the doorway, watching mother and daughter with an expression that made Talia's chest ache. "I need to tell you something else," he said quietly. "About your husband. About Derek." The way he said it, careful, pained, like each word cost something, made Talia's blood run cold. What about him? Not here, not with Nia sleeping. He held out his hand. "Come with me." They went to his study, the room where he handled business she'd learned not to ask about. Seok-jae poured himself whiskey, drank it in one swallow, then poured another he didn't touch. 3.5 years ago, he began, I was at war with the Volkov family. Territorial disputes, challenges to my authority, the kind of conflict that happens in my world when someone thinks you're weak enough to push. Talia felt her heart hammer against her ribs. 3.5 years ago, right when Derek had died. I didn't know your husband. Didn't know he existed. But he worked construction in zones the Volkovs considered theirs, and when my organization moved in, Seok-jae's voice cracked, something she'd only heard once before. That first Christmas Eve when Nia had offered him comfort he didn't deserve. The Volkovs retaliated, not against my people, against civilians, sending a message that territorial expansion had consequences. No, the word was barely a whisper. No, Derek died in an accident. Equipment failure. They investigated enough to close the case quickly, because Derek Moore was nobody important to anyone except you and Nia, because the Volkovs paid the foreman to sabotage the crane, because my war painted targets on innocent backs, and your husband paid the price for my ambition. Talia stumbled backward, hand pressed to her mouth. The room spun, reality reorganizing itself around this new, impossible information. You're saying Derek died because of you? Not by my order, not directly, but because of choices I made, territory I claimed, power I demanded. Seok-jae stayed where he was, making no move to comfort her, as if he knew he'd forfeited that right. I didn't know until 2 days ago. Jin found the same information Detective Wright uncovered. The connection between Derek's death and my organization's war with the Volkovs. 2 days? Talia's voice rose. You've known for 2 days and you're just telling me now? I needed to confirm, needed to be certain before I destroyed everything we'd built with truth you can't unhear. His hands shook, the only outward sign of emotion he allowed. Talia, I'm so sorry. If I could go back, if I could change it. But you can't. The words tore from her throat, 3 years of carefully maintained peace shattering like glass. You can't bring him back, can't give Nia her father, can't undo the fact that I fell in love with the man whose empire killed my husband. Nia appeared in the study doorway, sleep-tousled and frightened. Mama, why are you yelling? Talia and Seok-jae both froze, caught in the horrible tableau of a family disintegrating. Nia stood in her pajamas, soft pink decorated with stars, looking between the 2 adults who'd taught her that love meant safety. Baby, go back to bed, Talia managed, her voice strangled. Are you fighting? Nia's lower lip trembled. Are you breaking up? Like Emma's parents? No, Seok-jae said immediately, then stopped because he couldn't promise that. Not anymore. Talia crossed to her daughter, kneeling to eye level. We're just talking about grown-up things. Sometimes talking gets loud, but that doesn't mean anyone's leaving, okay? Promise? Nia's eyes, so much like Derek's God. How had Seok-jae looked at this child every day, knowing what he'd cost her? Searched her mother's face for truth. I promise we'll figure it out. The most honest answer Talia could give. Now back to bed. School tomorrow. After Nia reluctantly returned to her room, Talia faced Seok-jae across the study that suddenly felt like a courtroom. I need you to leave. Talia, please. She wrapped her arms around herself, protective of the life growing inside her that was his daughter too, but felt like betrayal in this moment. I can't look at you right now and not see everything I lost. I need time. Seok-jae grabbed his coat, moved toward the door, then stopped. Detective Wright will probably approach you soon. He knows about Derek. He's going to use it to turn you against me, to get testimony that could destroy my organization. And why shouldn't I help him? Talia's voice was bitter. You said it yourself. Derek died because of you. Because what we have is real. Because Nia loves me. Because that baby you're carrying deserves her father. He turned to face her, and the raw anguish on his features was almost unbearable to witness. I can't change the past, Talia, but I've spent 3 years becoming someone worthy of you and Nia. That has to count for something. I don't know what it counts for anymore. She looked away, unable to hold his gaze. Please go. After he left, Talia collapsed on the couch and let herself break. Sobbed for Derek, for the life they'd planned that had been stolen by men playing power games. Sobbed for Nia, who'd lost a father she barely remembered and might now lose the man who'd filled that void. Sobbed for herself, pregnant and in love with someone whose past had destroyed her first chance at family. The next morning, Detective Marcus Wright approached Talia outside the cafe. He was younger than she expected, mid-30s with kind eyes that had seen too much suffering. Mrs. Moore? I'm Detective Wright. I'd like to talk to you about your husband's death. Talia's hands tightened on her car keys. I know who you are. I saw the pictures. Then you know I've been investigating Yoon Seok-jae. What you might not know is that I have evidence connecting his organization to Derek's accident. Marcus pulled out a folder, offering it. The Volkov family sabotaged that construction site as retaliation for territorial moves Seok-jae made. Your husband was collateral damage in a war between criminals. I know. The admission felt like swallowing glass. Seok-jae told me. Marcus looked genuinely surprised. He admitted it. He found out 2 days ago, told me last night. Talia's voice was hollow. So if you're here to turn me against him, you're too late. The truth already did that. I'm here because you deserve justice. Because Derek deserves justice. Marcus's voice held conviction. Help me build a case against Seok-jae's organization. Testify about what you know, what he's told you, the business operations you've witnessed. We can finally hold these people accountable. Talia looked at this detective who thought justice was simple, who believed that punishment erased harm. And what happens to my daughter? The one who's called Seok-jae her father for 3 years, or the one I'm carrying? Who'll be born into whatever mess this creates? Marcus's expression flickered. You're pregnant. 6 weeks. His daughter. She laughed bitterly. Ironic, isn't it? The man whose empire killed my first husband gave me my second child. Mrs. Moore, I understand this is complicated. You understand nothing. Talia's composure cracked. You want justice for Derek? So do I. But Derek would want Nia to be happy and safe. He'd want his daughter protected. And right now the person best positioned to protect her is the man you want to destroy. She walked past him into the cafe, leaving Marcus standing on the sidewalk with his folder of evidence and his certainty that right and wrong were clearly defined. Inside, Talia went through the motions of work. Brewing coffee, serving customers, managing staff, while her mind spun in circles. She needed to talk to someone, needed perspective that wasn't clouded by love or grief or fear. She called Jin. The lieutenant arrived within 20 minutes, his usually inscrutable expression showing concern. Boss said you might need something. I need the truth, all of it. Talia met his gaze squarely. You've been with Seok-jae since the beginning. Tell me about the war with the Volkovs. Tell me what kind of man he was before Christmas Eve 3 years ago. Jin was quiet for a long moment. Then, he was ruthless, efficient, brilliant in strategy but cold in execution. When his father died and left him the organization, everyone expected him to fail. He was too young, too American, too willing to change old methods. But he didn't fail. No. He consolidated power, eliminated threats, expanded territories his father never dared touch. The Volkovs challenged him because they thought second generation meant weak. They were wrong. Jin's voice held a complicated mixture of loyalty and regret. The war lasted 8 months. Seok-jae was unforgiving. Dismantled their operations piece by piece until they had nothing left, and civilians caught in the crossfire. We tried to minimize damage, but in that world, collateral happens. Jin looked at her directly. Your husband wasn't the only innocent who died because of that war, but he was the one that eventually brought the boss back to humanity. Talia frowned. What do you mean? After you came into his life, after Nia offered him that kindness, he changed. Started asking questions he'd never asked before. Who gets hurt when we move into new territory? What happens to families in contested zones? How do we operate without creating more widows? Jin's expression softened. He became obsessed with making sure what happened to your husband never happened again. He didn't know it happened the first time. No. But he knew he'd caused pain, knew his choices had consequences he'd never bothered to count. Jin stood, preparing to leave. The man you fell in love with exists because you and Nia showed him there was another way to be. The man who built his empire on ruthlessness is real too. Both truths matter. After Jin left, Talia sat in the empty cafe and made a decision. Talia found Seok-jae at Derek's grave. She hadn't expected him there, hadn't told him where she was going when she'd texted that she needed to talk. But there he was, standing before the simple headstone in the cemetery on Chicago's south side, hands in his coat pockets, head bowed like he was praying or confessing or both. She approached slowly, her footsteps on the grass the only sound in the October afternoon. How did you know I'd come here? Because I would. Seok-jae didn't turn to face her. If I'd lost you, I'd come to where you rested and beg forgiveness for all the ways I failed you. Talia stood beside him, reading the inscription she'd chosen 3.5 years ago. Derek Moore, beloved husband and father. His light lives on. I've been thinking about what Derek would want, she said quietly. He was a good man, patient, kind, the type who believed everyone deserved second chances. He'd have hated what you were, but he'd have seen what you became. I don't deserve... Let me finish. Talia's voice held steel beneath the sorrow. Derek died because of choices you made. That's truth, and we can't pretend otherwise. But you didn't kill him, you didn't order it, you didn't even know he existed. Does that matter? The outcome is the same. It matters because intent matters. Because the man standing here confronting his past isn't the same man who made those choices. She finally looked at him, seeing the evidence of sleepless nights etched in his features. But I need you to understand something. I'm not forgiving you because I've stopped hurting. I'm forgiving you because holding on to this pain would destroy everything we've built, and that would make Derek's death meaningless. Seok-jae turned to her, his eyes shining with unshed tears. What are you saying? I'm saying... Talia took a shaking breath. I'm saying Derek gave me Nia, the greatest gift of my life. And through losing him, I eventually found you. And you've given me safety, partnership, love I thought I'd never feel again. You've been a father to his daughter with such devotion that sometimes I forget you didn't raise her from birth. Talia, I'm saying that baby growing inside me deserves to know her father, that Nia deserves the family we've become, that I love you despite this. Maybe even because you're facing it honestly instead of running. She reached for his hand, lacing their fingers together. But I need you to make me a promise. Anything. Promise me that Derek's death meant something. That you'll keep becoming the man he'd have wanted protecting his daughter. That every choice you make from this moment forward will honor the life your world took from us. Seok-jae sank to his knees before Derek's grave, pulling Talia down with him. His voice broke as he spoke. "Derek Moore, I swear on everything I am and everything I'm trying to become. I will protect your daughter with my life. I will love the woman you loved with everything in me. I will be worthy of the family you left behind, or I'll die trying." The words were formal, ritualistic, a vow made to a dead man who couldn't hear or accept it. But Talia heard, and she believed, and that was enough. They stayed there until the sun began to set, two people kneeling before a grave and making promises to the past about the future. When they finally stood, Talia placed a hand over her stomach. "We should tell Nia about her sister. About everything." Seokjae's voice held fear. "About Derek and the Volkovs and why I was crying at her father's grave. Not everything, not yet. She's 10. She deserves to stay innocent a little longer." Talia leaned into him, accepting the comfort of his arms around her. "But she deserves to know she's going to be a big sister. She's been praying for it long enough." That evening they sat Nia down in the penthouse living room. The city lights twinkled beyond the windows, Chicago spreading out beneath them like a promise of possibility. "We have something to tell you," Talia began, watching her daughter's face cycle through concern, curiosity, and hope. "Are you getting married?" Nia asked immediately. "Because I've been thinking about it and I really think you should. I could be the flower girl and we could have cake and—" "Not quite yet," Seokjae said with a small smile. "Though that's a conversation for another day. This is something else. Something better." Nia's eyes were wide with anticipation. "Something you've been praying for," Talia said. "How would you feel about being a big sister?" The squeal that erupted from Nia was loud enough to startle them both. She launched herself at Talia, hugging her fiercely before turning to Seokjae with such joy it made his chest ache. "I'm going to have a sister, really? You're not joking?" When they both nodded, she started crying. Happy tears that spoke to a child's deep longing finally fulfilled. "I'm going to teach her everything, and protect her always, and be the best big sister in the entire world." Seokjae pulled them both into his arms, Talia, Nia, and the daughter growing between them, and felt the weight of Derek's memory settle alongside the promise he'd made. This family, built from grief and guilt and grace, was worth every sacrifice, but the world wasn't done testing them yet. Detective Marcus Wright presented his findings to Captain Rodriguez on a grey November morning, 3 weeks after his conversation with Talia. "This is everything," Marcus said, spreading folders across the conference table. "Financial records connecting Seokjae's organization to the Volkov territory war. Witness statements about the construction site sabotage. Documentation proving Derek Moore's death was murder disguised as accident." Rodriguez reviewed the materials with the careful attention of someone who'd learned that strong cases could still fall apart in court. "The problem is proving Seokjae ordered it. You have evidence of organizational activity, but nothing directly linking him to Moore's death. He was in charge. The war was his strategy, which his lawyers will argue doesn't make him criminally responsible for actions taken by rival organizations." Rodriguez closed the folder. "You need more testimony from someone inside. Financial records showing he knew about the sabotage. Something concrete." Talia Moore could testify. "Mrs. Moore is pregnant with his child and clearly unwilling to cooperate. Any defense attorney would shred her credibility, claim she's biased, protecting her family." Rodriguez met Marcus's frustrated gaze. "I'm not saying give up, I'm saying build a better case before we move forward." Marcus left the precinct, feeling the weight of Derek Moore's unavenged death. He'd been so certain that exposing the truth would bring justice, that Talia would choose righteousness over the man who'd destroyed her first family. Instead, she'd chosen love. Chosen the complicated reality of a man who'd changed over simple vengeance against who he'd been. Marcus couldn't accept that. Wouldn't let Derek Moore's death become just another unsolved file in a city drowning in unpunished crime. Meanwhile, Seokjae was implementing changes that would have horrified his father. He met with lieutenants in his downtown office, Jin taking notes as the boss outlined a new direction. Effective immediately, we're divesting from anything that puts civilians at risk, Seok-jae announced. Protection rackets in residential zones, territory disputes that could escalate to violence, any operation where collateral damage is likely. Boss, that's over 60% of our revenue streams, one lieutenant protested. Then we find new revenue. Legitimate businesses, legal investments, operations that don't require us to become the kind of men who create widows. Seok-jae's voice held absolute authority. My father built this organization on fear and blood. I'm building something different. Because of the woman, another lieutenant said, not questioning, just acknowledging reality. Because of my family, Seok-jae corrected. Because I have a daughter who looks at me like I hung the stars, and another daughter coming who deserves a father she can be proud of. Because the man I was 3 years ago would have destroyed everything I value now. After the meeting, Jin lingered. This is going to make enemies, people in the organization who profit from the old ways, rival families who'll see change as weakness. Let them see what they want. Seok-jae pulled up images on his computer, ultrasound photos Talia had sent him that morning. Their daughter, barely visible but undeniably real. I spent 15 years proving I was strong enough to rule through fear. Now I need to prove I'm strong enough to rule through something else. Love, accountability. Making choices I can defend when my daughters ask me what kind of man their father is. Seok-jae closed the laptop, meeting Jin's gaze. I know it's risky. I know some won't follow. But I can't be the man Talia believes I am, while running operations that could destroy someone else's family. Jin nodded slowly. Then we'll make it work. The loyal ones will adapt. The others, we'll handle them. 2 weeks later, as Talia entered her second trimester and Nia excitedly prepared her bedroom to accommodate a baby sister, Marcus Wright made his move. He didn't approach Talia again, recognized that avenue was closed. Instead, he approached Nia. She was leaving school, waiting for the car service that had become routine over the past 3 years. Marcus positioned himself carefully, making sure surveillance cameras would capture their conversation, ensuring everything was documented and above board. Nia Moore, he showed his badge. I'm Detective Wright. I'd like to ask you some questions about Yoon Seok-jae. Nia looked at the badge with the wariness her mother had taught her. I'm not supposed to talk to strangers, especially not about my family. Seok-jae isn't your family. He's your mother's boyfriend. Marcus kept his voice gentle, non-threatening. Did you know he runs a criminal organization? That he's hurt a lot of people? He helps people. Nia's voice held absolute certainty. He helped us when we had nothing. He loves my mama. He's going to be my baby sister's father. Nia, I knew your real father, Derek Moore. He was a good man who died in an accident that wasn't really an accident. Marcus crouched to her eye level, conviction driving him forward, despite the voice in his head warning this was wrong. Seok-jae's organization was responsible for that accident. He's the reason you don't have your dad. The car pulled up before Nia could respond, but the damage was done. Marcus saw it in how her face crumpled, in the tears that started before she scrambled into the vehicle. The driver, one of Seok-jae's people, immediately recognized the situation. By the time Nia reached the penthouse, sobbing and confused, Seok-jae and Talia both knew what had happened. Talia held her daughter while fury and fear warred in her chest. Baby, what exactly did the detective say? Between hiccuping sobs, Nia repeated Marcus's words. Each one landed like a blow to her innocence, to their carefully protected peace, to the family they'd built from fractured pieces. Seok-jae stood frozen, watching the child he loved as his own daughter process a truth he'd hoped she'd never learn this way. When Nia finally lifted her tear-stained face to look at him, the question in her eyes nearly broke him. Did your people hurt my daddy? The moment stretched, fragile as glass. Seok-jae could lie, could deflect, could be the man who protected himself at all costs. Instead, he knelt before her, choosing truth over comfort. My organization was at war with people who did hurt your father. I didn't know him, didn't order it, didn't even know it happened until a few weeks ago. But yes, my choices created the situation that cost you your dad. Why didn't you tell me? Nia's voice was small, wounded. Because you're 10 and some truths are too heavy for children to carry. Because I was afraid you'd hate me. Because I love you more than I've ever loved anyone except your mother and your baby sister. And the thought of losing you terrifies me. Seok-jae's voice broke. I'm sorry, Nia. For what happened to your father. For keeping this from you. For not being able to change the past. Nia was quiet for a long moment, tears still streaming. Then, do you love us? Me and Mama and the baby. More than anything in this world. More than your business and your power and all that stuff? Infinitely more. She studied his face with the particular intensity of children deciding whether to trust. Mama said Daddy would want us to be happy, that he'd want me safe and loved. A shaky breath. Are you keeping that promise? To keep us safe and love us? Every single day. Nia threw her arms around his neck, holding tight while she cried out her grief and confusion and the complicated love that existed, despite everything. Seok-jae held her, his own tears falling silently, while Talia watched the two people she loved most navigate impossible waters. When Nia finally pulled back, she looked between them both. I'm still mad and confused, and I wish none of this had happened. Me too, baby, Talia said, pulling her daughter close, but we're still a family, right? The question held desperate hope. Always, Seok-jae promised. Nothing changes that. The confrontation with Detective Marcus Wright happened in Seok-jae's downtown office 2 days later. Jin had arranged the meeting. Neutral ground, recorded for legal protection, witnessed by lawyers on both sides. Marcus arrived expecting intimidation, threats, the usual tactics of men like Seok-jae. Instead, he found a man who looked exhausted and determined in equal measure. You approached my daughter, Seok-jae said without preamble, a 10-year-old child without her mother present to use her as leverage against me. I told her the truth about who you are. You traumatized a child to build your case. Seok-jae's voice was cold, controlled. Whatever moral high ground you think you occupy, you lost it when you made a little girl cry. Derek Moore's daughter deserves to know. Derek Moore's daughter deserves to heal from losing her father without having that wound reopened by a detective more interested in closing cases than protecting the living. Seok-jae leaned forward, his expression hard. You want justice for Derek? So do I. I'm dismantling every operation in my organization that could create another widow, another fatherless child. I'm using my resources to ensure what happened to him never happens again. That's not justice. That's damage control. That's accountability, real, lasting change instead of prosecution that might put me away but does nothing to address the systems that created the problem. Seok-jae pulled out a folder, sliding it across the desk. These are the Volkov family members directly responsible for Derek's death. Names, locations, evidence sufficient for prosecution. I'm handing them to you. Marcus opened the folder, scanning documents that represented months of investigation. Why? Because Derek Moore's death should be answered. Because the people who actually ordered the sabotage should face consequences. Because justice matters. Just not the simplified version where you get to destroy my family to make yourself feel righteous. And you get away with it. I get to live with it, Seok-jae corrected. Every single day, I wake up next to the woman who lost her husband because of my war. Every day I look at her daughter and see the father she'll never remember. Every day, I feel my daughter move inside Talia and know I'm building my happiness on someone else's grief. His voice roughened. You think I get away with that? Marcus studied the man across the desk, seeing not the monster he'd expected, but someone carrying genuine remorse. What about your organization? The illegal operations? Being reformed? Scaled back or divested entirely. I'm not claiming sainthood, Detective. Just trying to become someone my daughters can respect. Seok-jae stood, signaling the meeting's end. You have enough there to bring down the people who actually killed Derek Moore. That's real justice. What you do with it is your choice. After Marcus left, Jin entered. Think he'll use it? He's a good cop. He'll use it. Seok-jae looked out at Chicago spread beneath his window, and then maybe Derek Moore's death will mean something more than just the tragedy that brought me to my knees. 3 months later, on a February morning as cold as the Christmas Eve they'd first met, Talia went into labor. Seok-jae drove her to the hospital with Nia in the back seat, his hand steady on the wheel despite his racing heart. The delivery was long, difficult, filled with moments of fear that made him understand exactly what he'd been willing to risk for power before he'd learned what truly mattered. When their daughter finally arrived, healthy, perfect, with a cry that announced her fierce entry into the world, Seok-jae held her with hands that had done terrible things and found redemption in this tiny life that trusted him completely. She needs a name, Talia said from the hospital bed, exhausted and radiant. Nia, who'd been allowed in to meet her sister, spoke up with characteristic certainty. Grace, because Mama says Grace is getting good things we don't deserve, and this family is all about Grace. Seok-jae met Talia's gaze over their daughter's head. She nodded, tears streaming, and he understood that Grace would carry the weight of everything they'd survived and everything they'd become. Grace Yunmore, he said, using both their names because this child belonged to all of them. Perfect. Detective Marcus Wright attended the Volkov trials 3 weeks later, watching as the men directly responsible for Derek Moore's death faced federal charges for murder, conspiracy, and racketeering. The evidence Seok-jae provided had been thorough, damning, impossible to refute. As the verdicts came down, guilty, 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 Marcus thought about justice and what it actually meant. He'd wanted to destroy Seok-jae, to punish the man whose empire had created the conditions for tragedy. Instead, he'd participated in something more nuanced, accountability that honored the victim, while acknowledging that people could change. It didn't feel like enough. But watching Derek Moore's killers led away in handcuffs, Marcus had to admit it was something. In the hospital room where Grace Yunmore slept peacefully in her father's arms, Talia watched Seok-jae with the particular tenderness of someone who'd chosen love over vengeance and found peace in that choice. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Giving up your empire, changing everything, living with the weight of what you can't undo?" Seok-jae looked at Grace, then at Nia curled beside Talia on the bed, then at the woman who taught him that redemption was possible, even for men like him. Never. Not for a single second. Even knowing what it cost Derek. Especially knowing what it cost him. Seok-jae's voice held conviction. "I can't bring him back. Can't give Nia her biological father, or erase the grief you carried. But I can make sure his death meant something, that it led to change, that the family he left behind found happiness again." Nia stirred, opening her eyes to look at them both. "Is Daddy watching from heaven? Does he see us?" "I believe he does," Talia said, pulling her daughter close. "Then I hope he knows we're okay now, that Seok-jae loves us really good, that baby Grace is perfect." Nia's voice held the wisdom of someone far older than 10. "I think Daddy would be happy we found each other." Seok-jae closed his eyes against the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. 3 years ago, a 7-year-old girl had offered to share her mother with a stranger who was crying. Now that same girl, older, wiser, carrying knowledge that had tested her faith, still believed in the family they'd become. "I made him a promise," Seok-jae said, "at his grave, that I'd protect you, love your mother, honor his memory by becoming worthy of you both." "Are you keeping it?" Nia asked. "Every single day, and I'll keep it for the rest of my life." Outside the hospital window, Chicago spread beneath them, a city built on second chances, where empires rose and fell but families endured, where love proved stronger than guilt, and grace meant accepting gifts you hadn't earned but chose to honor. Talia reached for Seok-jae's hand, lacing their fingers together. We should go home soon. Grace needs to see her nursery. Nia has school tomorrow. Life continues. Life continues, he echoed, pressing a kiss to her temple. And we face it together. Nia leaned against Seok-jae's shoulder, her small hand resting on baby Grace's blanket. I'm really glad I asked you to borrow my mom that night, even though I didn't know it would lead to all this complicated stuff. Complicated stuff? Talia laughed softly. Yeah, the hard conversations and the sad truths, and having to figure out how to love people even when things aren't perfect. Nia looked up at Seok-jae with eyes that held Derek's kindness and Talia's strength. But that's what family is, right? Choosing each other even when it's hard? Especially when it's hard, Seok-jae agreed, his voice rough with emotion. As the February sun set over Chicago, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, 4 people sat together in a hospital room. A family built from loss and love, from guilt and grace, from the courage to face truth and the strength to choose forgiveness. They weren't perfect. Their story wasn't simple. But they were together and they were fighting for each other, and in the end, that mattered more than anything else. 3 years ago, Nia had offered her mother to a crying stranger. Today they were a family bound not just by love, but by the hard work of choosing each other, despite impossible circumstances. And baby Grace, sleeping peacefully in her father's arms, would grow up knowing that sometimes the greatest love stories are the ones that survive their own complicated truths.